Well, I first got to know Solesmes in 1992 and moved there finally in 1994. And so I started work at the Conservatoire in Angers then in 1994, and then at the same time at Solesmes. So that was a very fortuitous and wonderful combination of things, and I proceeded to continue with that for the next 7 years before moving to Paris. So there's no doubt that thanks to Westminster Cathedral, I discovered Solesmes, and thanks to Westminster Cathedral and to Solesmes, that I became a Catholic when I moved to France. So I owe, like I say, I owe all the people I've worked with an awful lot. I also owe Westminster Cathedral an awful lot, for all of these future links that it helped me to foster. The monks at Solesmes, indeed, ever since they refounded the community in the middle of the 19th century, they decided that they had to work on the liturgy and on rediscovering how monastic liturgy should be done in all its aspects. So Dom Prosper Gregorian, who was the first abbot, sent monks, really as you would have done in medieval times, like sending scribes to various libraries, first of all across France and then further afield, to copy out by hand manuscripts that they found in libraries. Then technology meant that they could obtain a lot of manuscripts subsequently on microfilm. So the Paléographe Musical, which is the sort of musical centre, the beautiful room off the cloisters of the monastery, in which all of these documents are housed, all the microfilm and so on. They created huge comparative tableau comparatif is what it is in French. In other words, a particular melody, Gregorian melody, from one manuscript that might be at St. Gall in Switzerland, another one that might be somewhere else. Anyway, various, and sometimes you see sort of up to 12 different sources, the same melody. And of course, because notation was anything but standardized, they had to learn to read the different neumes, the different way of writing music. And that they compared every note, every word, every detail, if you like, to try and obtain the most authentic, so to speak, version. Given that one was dealing with something that was already a highly developed oral tradition. And an oral tradition, even though monks still today display an astonishing ability to memorize vast swathes of chant and text, inevitably what happens when you have an oral tradition is it's flavoured with local practice. That in one particular place you might sing faster, you might sing slower, you might add a few notes of ornamentation, you might various things that can mean that there can be differences, and simply that nonetheless the mind does remember things perhaps slightly differently. So trying to collate all this information from across across Christendom, nice to be able to use that word, was a wonderfully visionary approach to trying to arrive at a form of liturgy with its music that could be as true as they could possibly make it to the tradition. So yes, it was wonderful to be able to be part of that, and my role particularly was of course to provide organ music for the liturgies. We felt very privileged because the Académie Vocale had been invited by the monks to give a concert to mark the millennium, and they'd invited a cardinal from Rome. They had all sorts of people, all the oblates, very important people who came to Solesmes for basically 2 days of celebration. So anyway, we gave this concert, and then they decided after those celebrations to make a CD that would be available to commemorate millennium. So there was the monks singing, and I played a certain number of works by Bach on the organ there.
Yes.
And there are also some amazing recordings of the bells of the abbey, which are glorious. So that was another thing, but it was a wonderful thing. It was nice to be alive. If you think about it, it's not every day a monastery celebrates a millennium. France seemed a very natural thing to do, and I was very fortunate because there was a professorship up for which I applied at the National Conservatoire in Angers, absolutely beautiful city. Near the Loire, and that was really superb, and only 60 kilometres from Solesmes. So I found myself in France, if you like, doing very much what I had been doing in London previously, but in two different places. For the first few years as novices, monks don't have time to practice the organ, practice their singing particularly. They're studying, they've got so much to study. It's a huge undertaking. And indeed the abbot will cleverly steer monks away from things that they're naturally good at. The point being that you don't want your ego to start investing that space. And I think it's good for us to at least reflect on this aspect in our own lives actually, is that if you do something that you're naturally good at, you tend to... Pride isn't far behind. And with pride comes lots of other negative things, And your love becomes for that, or for the image of yourself doing that, more than for God. So I think whilst a monastery needs the talents of the different monks in its daily makeup, the abbot has to be is a very remarkable man who looks after he's a shepherd, and he's got his flock, and he's looking after them, and taking care, and the time they might spend on something shouldn't exceed so much. And the monastic day actually is broken up in such a way that you can't get too invested in anything. It's one of the frustrations for us outsiders, thinking when we had to make a recording of Solesmes, no sooner had we got warmed up and started, it was time to stop. Bell was ringing, there was another service.
Yes, it was.
But that's deliberate. It's the way that their monastic day means that the focus is always on God, on the liturgy, and on prayer. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. So we in our secular lives get very wrapped up in ourselves, worrying about this, that and the other, but it's just good to, for centering oneself a little better, to think about things like that too.